I want to talk about this Orange Horses by Maeve Kelly, published by Tramp Press, who are responsible in the last couple of years for the extraordinary Spill, Simmer, Falter, Wither, and probably the even more extraordinary Solar Bones. So any book they publish has to be taken seriously. Um, Maeve Kelly is not a writer that I've ever heard of, and this is part of their what do they call it? Their Recovered Voices series, number 3. I haven't read number 1 or 2, um, and it's a book of short stories. So, what do I think? Well, I'm going to say two things first. One, I think it's extraordinary. And two, my partner Bridget also thinks it's extraordinary. Now, why have I brought her in? Because I'm not a great lover of short stories, but Bridget is. So, in a sense, I'm saying that it succeeds in two ways. It succeeds in me really enjoying it and finding the short form fiction less satisfying, perhaps, than a lot of people do. But it also manages to convince someone who really loves short stories of its quality. Bridget thinks it's one of the best books she's ever read, short stories or no. So that's a kind of double endorsement, if you will. Now, why is it so good? Two reasons, I think. One, often with short stories, they wear their craft quite boldly, in the sense that there are ways of writing short stories. You can be taught to write short stories. I think Toby Litt on Facebook somewhere sort of said, here's the 10 rules to write a great short story. And really, if you followed them, if you have any ability to put words in a half decent order, you'll come up with a short story. And there's a kind of fetishization of the short story. So it is some kind of, almost kind of like haiku or Zen koan or whatever. And I'm often unconvinced by that. There are great short story writers, and they do tend to be the best in the form. But there's something about this which I find particularly extraordinary, which is that you don't feel that the form that she's sort of chosen to write short stories. You feel that these stories have just emerged and they happen to be short. I think there's two short stories here, actually. The first one, Amnesty, and The Vain Woman, which are as good as any short story written by, Chekhov or Raymond Carver, or I can't remember the Canadian who writes brilliant short stories. They're as good as, and I almost think Amnesty might be the best short story I've ever read. So, unequivocal endorsement. But the other thing which I think is particularly interesting is an introduction by a called Simon Workman, which actually talks about women writers in Ireland in sort of mid 20th century, sort of the 60s and 70s, so sort of 3/4 of the way through. That actually, if you think about it, there wasn't a great deal of women's writing around that time, and actually, literary critics were saying, why aren't there more women writers? And then actually, when women writers, especially this woman, produce work, they were actually sort of slightly scathing about it and sort of hypercritical, which was completely unjustified. But also, I think that what's interesting about Irish writing of that time is that Ireland was in some way a kind of cultural hinterland, or a hinterland of modernity. So maybe in the universities in the big cities, of which there really aren't that many big cities, that actually that you get the sense from these short stories just quite how kind of deeply rural and almost 19th century the world is. But of course, the 20th century and is kind of received through TV and radio and the media, or whatever. But it's also, but it's as if the island or the parts she writes about in certain stories haven't caught up, and that gives them a kind of a poignancy, but B, you feel you're discovering a kind of mode of being, which has been almost kind of, I feel it's kind of been lost across Western Europe, and it might, I'm sure, that in certain kind of, peasant cultures in, France and Spain and whatever, it's there, but you kind of don't think about it quite in the kind of Anglophone world, but it's there in Ireland, and she's really good at delivering something about that kind of rural, kind of, I don't know, it's a sort of where kind of modern culture is just not relevant, and that's why The Vain Woman is just glorious, and anyone who's interested in writing short stories, and wants to see a master that is not in any way trying to kind of own the form, but just merely express a particular world or a set of worlds through that form. This is a masterpiece, and so that's it really. I couldn't recommend it more, and I look forward to reading it again. Thank you.